Alright, so today I wanted to talk about a little bit about just game design and like how easy it is to make a hit video game. I think that a lot of people have some kind of impression that like you can make a hit indie video game, it's going to make a ton of money, etc. You can probably do it all by yourself and so on. And I want to push back against that a little bit and give you an understanding of just how difficult that is. I would also keep in mind that this is not just about video games. Like you could say this about virtually anything. You could say this about writing a book. You could say this about becoming an actor and so on. It's always going to be a lot harder to just become a person who is extremely rich for making some kind of cultural content for people to consume than you might think. And you really need to understand that in many cases you are not going to be that person at the very top end of the spectrum who's making a lot of money. So the headline for this one is 63% of games released in the last 12 months on Steam, total of 14,000 games generating less than $1,000 in revenue. Fingers crossed to making it to the top 5%, generating over 200K. Now, I know that this, is like a pretty, disturbing sort of figure. So basically the reality is that most video games are not going to make any money. And like one of the commenters here points out that, a lot of these games, there's not a high bar to release stuff. A lot of this stuff is shovelware. A lot of this stuff is basically just like, somebody doesn't have very much experience, put together some silly little project, charges a few bucks for it, whatever. Okay, yeah, that's fine. And someone else in the comments pointed out another post which basically points out that there is a difference between games that are probably shovelware and games that are probably not shovelware. So if you price things at $10 or more, the median revenue goes from like nothing to like close to like $20,000, right? And that's not awful, right? But let's say that you've just spent a year making a video game, and to be fair, a lot of people take a lot longer than a year to make a video game, right? Like a lot of people don't really know what they're doing the first time they try and make a video game, especially if they're doing it by themselves. And so they could take multiple years. This could be a passion project that they're working on while they're, doing other jobs and so on. But, imagine that you're that person, right? You've just spent several years working on some kind of passion project that you've solo made. You've learned all kinds of stuff about how to, make a game. And the end result is that you make $20,000 out of it, right? That's, it's an okay amount of money. Is that an okay amount of money for the time that you've put into it? Probably not. It's probably like really awful. You're probably getting less than minimum wage for doing something like that. And even if we go back to the previous example where we talk about, 5% generating over 200K, right? Let's say that, that means that you have to be in the top 5% just to get like a good yearly wage, right? Like, okay, yearly wage, probably like $100,000, something like that. Yeah. If you made $200,000 from making a single video game, that would be awesome. That's certainly a big payday, right? Especially again, if that took you like maybe a year to make that game, $200,000 for a year, that's no chump change, right? But at the same time, again, if that took you several years to make, if you were not, doing it as a solo dev, you had a whole team that you were working with, let's say that there are, say, 4 or 5 of you splitting $200,000. Again, goes back down to the point where you're not making very much money at all. And even if this was you as a solo dev making $200,000, yeah, that's great. Can you repeat that every single year with every single game that you make? Probably not. There's not really going to be any consistency there. Some games are going to do well, some games won't. So chances are you had like, a good game that made $200,000 and that's it. The next year you try and make another game that makes nothing or very little or whatever. And so of course, like you need to hope that you budgeted effectively and you kept that $200,000 and you used it to, pay your expenses forward for future years rather than, blowing it all on a nice car or something like that. And then, of course, the reality is that most of the games that are actually generating a lot of money are going to be games that have, a lot more than just one dev. It's going to be something where, of course, it's a company working with a bunch of different people all at once. And, of course, they're going to have a lot of advertising dollars that they spent on things. And they're going to do a crap ton of market research to make sure that this game turns out right and so on. It's probably not very realistic as a solo dev that you would get to that point by yourself. Another good example of this situation is this Twitter post that I came across a while back. It says, in case you're wondering why the classic game dev advice is always make and release a bunch of small projects first before jumping into a big one, this is why. Headline from Reddit, I made a game for 3 years, only sold $143 in 3 months. What should I do now? And essentially the story is that this person spent 3 years, including 2 years in college, developing a roguelike game, released as an early access game, had a rough initial launch, a little bit of negative reviews, fixed all of these issues pretty quickly, continued to develop the game, but it's basically not making any money at all. They might make, one sale every now and then, and that's about it. And so essentially he's starting to realize that this game is not really going to make him very much money at all. And of course, this went a little bit viral as a result of all this sharing. I'm sure that he probably got quite a few more sales out of that as a result. So I'm sure that has helped him out a little bit. But at the same time, he's well aware that there are issues with the game. He's really not sure how much he wants to continue and so on. So the reality here is that it is probably a lot harder to make a significant amount of money making games than you might think. Again, like a lot of people probably, and myself included, think that it is, pretty easy. All you have to do is be a good game designer, a good coder, a good game dev, and you can make a good game, and that is what's going to make you money. An important mind shift to realize, and this is a lot of what was going on in that Twitter thread saying, hey, you need to make and release a bunch of small projects before you jump into something bigger, is that very often when you're starting out as a game dev, you don't necessarily have the right idea in terms of the fact that a game needs to be marketable. At the end of the day, you could make the best game in the world, and if it is too similar to a bunch of existing games, if it doesn't really offer some kind of unique selling point, if it doesn't have a specific brand or something that sets it apart from the competition, then ultimately at the end of the day, it's not going to sell very well unless you get extremely lucky or you have really good marketing or whatever. Let's say, for example, that I decided to make a game nowadays that's basically just like Final Fantasy 1, right? Like a very old game, 2D top-down RPG, very traditional combat and so on. Is that going to sell very well? No. Did it sell very well back when it was first released as Final Fantasy 1? Yes, of course. The reason for that is that at the time it was something new and different. It was something that was not exactly the same as all the other stuff out there. Nowadays, there are a lot more video games out there, and that means that there's a lot more variations of all that sort of stuff. There's a lot more like, oh, we made like this, kind of RPG with this slight variation on it, and as a result, it's out there on the market, and it's going to look very similar to a lot of other games out there, and so if, somebody is like trying to objectively choose between these 4 different games that all look the same, they're probably just going to pick one, right? And at the end of the day, you can personally do all that you can to like market something, to tell people about it, etc. But by yourself, as a single person, without, again, a ton of like marketing power behind you, you can't really do very much. That's just the reality. Like, you cannot convince enough people to buy your video game by word of mouth alone to get it to become popular enough to really make you a lot of money. And so what a game needs is to have something that really differentiates itself from the pack. You need to have some kind of new cool mechanic. You need to have a new kind of setting. You need to have, certain levels of polish. You need to be showing people something immediately from the very beginning that is very different from what's out there. And if you do that, you have the potential to make a game that, again, is going to get a lot of people playing it, a lot of people are going to enjoy it, and a lot of people are going to tell their friends about it, and so on. But if you make a game that is fundamentally very similar to a lot of other games out there, you're going to be fighting uphill. You're going to have a hard time, getting that to work. And so that's what that advice means, is like when you're saying like make and release a bunch of small projects, part of it is that you are trying to learn not just like technically how to create a game, like, the actual technical, like how do I make a game that functions well, where all the mechanics feel smooth and all that. You're also trying to figure out like what makes my game different. How can I release a game that is fundamentally different from everything else out there in a really good way? And to be fair, there's a lot of value in trying and failing, right? Like as a beginner game dev, yes, you get a lot of benefit out of trying a lot of smaller projects, realizing that they're not going to work out or that they're not going to be very good, and so on. And so the fundamental issue for this guy who spent 3 years making this game only for it to fail is that he spent too much time, and the phrase I always use is polishing a turd. there's not necessarily a correlation between how much effort you put into a game and how good it's going to be received marketing-wise. You can make a really, really well-polished game. You can put an incredible amount of effort into it. The effort alone is not what makes it good, and that's the problem. Again, you have to separate those two in your mind. You can spend an insane amount of time polishing a turd, and at the end of the day, it's still going to be a turd. But if you have something that is a brilliant, beautiful game concept, even if it is not necessarily polished, people will understand that, they will see that, they will like the game. And then if you spend a lot more time polishing that game, it's going to come out even better. So the whole problem here is that a lot of people don't really have, early on in their game dev career, the ability to determine what's a turd, what's not a turd, right? You need to be able to tell that difference. And really the only thing that you can do to become better as a game dev is figure that out over time. Like, make a bunch of games, get a bunch of jobs, fail, make mistakes, etc. And over time, you'll start to discover, okay, this is what makes a game good. This is just a turd, and there's no point in continuing to put effort into it. You can waste a lot of time in your life continuing to try and polish a turd. Now, at the end of the day, again, this doesn't just apply to video games. The exact numbers are going to vary from industry to industry, of course, but this could be literally any creative thing that you think might get you a lot of money, might get you a lot of fame, might get you a lot of attention, etc. This could be writing a book. This could be learning how to paint. This could be making video games. This could be making movies. This could be things like running a YouTube channel. This could be all kinds of different things. No matter what sector you are in, there is always going to be a difference between technically well done, polished turds and products that are not turds, which are amazing. Part of the way that you figure this out is, of course, just by practicing and learning from your mistakes over time, and that's always going to be true. A lot of people could get stuck in that early phase where they, again, spend way too much time polishing a turd, or they get discouraged by the fact that they're failing and failing repeatedly to make good games, but that's the only way that you can really learn. You need to cut your teeth somehow, you need to figure out the difference between the two, and then eventually one day you can have that one brilliant genius idea. Maybe you just have one in your lifetime. Maybe you have two or three. It all depends, right? So that's all for today's video. As always, hope you enjoyed it. Don't hesitate to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you would like to see in future videos. Smash that notification bell. I will see you all next time.